Sable was already asleep under the negotiating table when the Rethkai envoy told me to remove him. Not a request. The translation came through flat and formal, the way their language always did through the relay. Stripped of whatever tone they actually used, leaving only the shape of the command. The animal is not appropriate for a contact of this designation. Remove it before the next session. The lead envoy, the one they called Vethar of the Third Compact, hadn't looked at Sable when he said it. He'd looked at me. I looked back. Then I looked down at Sable, who had his chin on the floor and was breathing the long, slow breath of a dog who has decided that wherever he is done moving for the foreseeable future. He's a support animal, I said. He's cleared. The translator passed it along. Vethar of the Third Compact said nothing. The session ended. That was how the first 3 days went. I should explain what I was doing at Vescaret Waypost because it wasn't glamorous. 6 months into first contact with the Rethkai, the delegations had stalled on what the diplomatic corps was calling a procedural impasse and what the rest of us were calling a complete inability to agree on anything. The Rethkai did not recognize our lead diplomat's rank. Our lead diplomat did not recognize their objection to his rank. Both sides had spent 4 sessions arguing the terms under which they would argue the terms of the actual contact framework, and nobody had gotten anywhere. I was there as a support attaché. I handled logistics, translation relay maintenance, and the physical comfort of the human delegation, meals, environmental controls, that sort of thing. I had brought Sable because I bring Sable everywhere, and because he had the proper medical clearance, and because the alternative was leaving a 10-year-old beagle alone in my quarters on the platform for however many weeks this took. He was old enough that long stretches alone weren't good for him. He had a heart murmur. He moved slowly and smelled like warm bread, and he did not care about the Rethkai at all. That was, as it turned out, the relevant detail. On the 4th day, our lead diplomat, a man named Harwick, who was very good at his job under normal circumstances, pulled me aside before the session and told me I needed to leave Sable in my quarters. The Rethkai had formally objected again. Harwick was tired. He said the dog was becoming a distraction from the actual work. I told him I'd heard that, and I understood his position. Then I went and got Sable from where he'd been napping in the corridor and brought him into the contact annex. Harwick didn't say anything else. I think by then he'd already started to sense something, even if he couldn't have articulated it. The Rethkai kept saying they wanted the dog removed, but they had not walked out. They had not escalated through the formal channels, which they absolutely could have done. They kept coming back to the table, and every time they did, their gaze, the whole compound eye arrangement that served them for vision, kept returning to the one corner of the room where Sable was engaged in the extremely threatening activity of sleeping. I started paying attention to that on day 2. By day 4, I was certain of it. The Rethkai, I had learned from the xenobiology briefings, species that had reached their position in the compact largely through force. Not crude force. They weren't raiders. They were apex predators who had learned to negotiate, but they had never stopped being apex predators underneath. Their entire social architecture ran on the assessment of threat. Who is the most dangerous thing in this room? Who knows it? Pretending not to know it. Their war beasts, I'd seen the footage, were large, fast, and deeply status-aware. They snarled, they postured, they made themselves large and loud because that was how threat display worked in their ecology. Sable did not snarl. Sable did not posture. Sable was 10 years old and had a heart murmur, and his main interest in any room was identifying the most comfortable section of floor and whether anyone present had food. He was not performing calm. He simply was calm, the way a very old dog is calm, settled into himself, past the age of impressing anyone, at complete peace with his own presence in the world. I think to the Rethkai that read as something they had no framework for. On the 5th day, Vethar of the Third Compact arrived 12 minutes early and stood at the far end of the annex watching Sable before anyone else was seated. Sable was lying on his side near the leg of the table, one ear folded under, doing absolutely nothing. Vethar watched him for the full 12 minutes. His posture during those 12 minutes was one I hadn't seen from a Rethkai before. Their normal stance was elevated, deliberate, every movement a small declaration of intention. This was different. This was the way you stand when you are trying to understand something, and you are not certain your understanding is going to help you. I set out the water service and did not say anything. The session that day was the first one that made any actual progress. I didn't engineer it. I want to be clear about that, because after the fact there were people who suggested I had run some kind of deliberate operation. I hadn't. I had brought my dog because he needed to not be alone and because he was cleared. And because nobody had given me a direct order I was willing to follow on the subject. What happened after that was between Sable and the Rethkai and whatever instinct-level conversation was occurring between them that none of us were fully equipped to translate. On the 6th day, Sable decided that the floor, Vethar of the Third, Kempak's chair, was preferable to his usual corner. This was not a statement. This was a beagle, following the logic of floor, temperature, and proximity to a draft. He circled twice, sighed the long sigh of a creature who has considered all available options, and lay down. The annex went quiet in a particular way. The third, Kempak looked down at Sable for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I was pouring tea. I did not look back. The session ran 4 hours. They agreed on 3 framework articles. Harwick came and found me afterward in the corridor and stood there for a moment, without saying anything which was unusual for him. "What is he doing in there?" he finally said. "Sleeping, mostly," I said. Harwick nodded slowly. Like that was an answer he was going to need some time with. The formal request came through the translation relay that evening. Not from Vethar. From their cultural attaché, a quieter member of the delegation who had been taking notes throughout. The query was 3 lines. It asked, through carefully neutral language, what Sable's designation was within our social hierarchy, whether he held rank, what the correct form of acknowledgement was if any was owed. I thought about it for a while. Then I wrote back, he is a companion animal. He holds no formal rank. No acknowledgement is necessary. He is not concerned with such things. There was a long pause before the reply came. That is consistent with what we observed. The contact framework was signed on the 9th day. Sable slept through the signing ceremony. I had him on a long lead looped around the leg of my chair, and he was on his side with his paws loose and his breathing slow, the way he always slept, completely committed to it, the way old dogs are, as if sleep were a serious undertaking deserving of his full attention. Vethar of the Third Kempak paused beside him on the way out, just for a moment, long enough to look down at the dog, and then up at me, with something in his compound gaze I didn't have a word for yet. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. On the platform afterward, waiting for the transport back, Harwick asked me if I had known what the Rethkai were reading in Sable, whether I'd understood it from the start. I scratched Sable behind his left ear, the spot that made his back leg twitch. He leaned into it, eyes half closed, warm and heavy against my leg. He needed the company, I said. Harwick looked at me. Then he looked at Sable. Then he wrote something in his report that I was never officially told about, which apparently resulted in a new line item in the contact protocols. Something about the discretionary presence of Earth companion animals at contact events, being left to the judgment of the attending support staff. I heard they named it something formal in the documentation, a short phrase capitalized in the approved style. I didn't ask what it was. Sable wouldn't have cared.